Welcome to the Vintage Ballers Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Coreno, and on today's episode, we have Molly McQueary joining the show. Molly graduated from the University of Kentucky before moving to Cleveland and becoming a mental performance coach at T3 Performance Gym in Avon, Ohio. So without further ado, please welcome Molly McQueary. Molly, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those of you that don't know, I met Molly last summer when I was training at T3 Performance in Avon, Ohio. And my good buddy owns a gym, and I was there for about 6 months training, actually. And that's where I met you. So it's an honor having you on the show. And I want to get started by taking it back to your youth. So you grew up in Russell Springs, Kentucky. Tell everybody where that is in Kentucky, what it was like growing up there, and how did you fall in love with sports?
Yeah. So Russell Springs, Kentucky is in a really small town. You'll probably be able to hear my accent. My coworkers have said it's gone away, but I have a pretty thick Southern accent. So it's in South Central Kentucky, right in the heart of Lake Cumberland. So a lot of Ohio people go there to vacation. But it really had, when I was growing up, 4 stoplights. Now I think we're up to 6. I haven't been home since Christmas, but I think we're up to 6.
Molly, is Lake Cumberland where 76 Falls is?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. So I grew up on the lake. We're a lake family. When I was younger, I lived on a farm with like 36 horses, 60 chickens, like the whole country life. I really fell in love with sports, just, throwing the softball around with my sister and dad in the front yard. And then I really got into sports mainly at the age of like 4. I would say I started to really see myself becoming a swimmer at a young age. I just was so excited, always just summer league going and playing with all the other kids and continue to follow through with that. But a really small town, really into sports. Everybody knows everybody, essentially.
And down there, Molly, what are the big sports? Is it football, basketball, baseball?
Yeah, football, basketball, baseball, the traditional. We didn't have soccer growing up. We didn't have, lacrosse or any of the sports you see here in Ohio. So the basic sports, basketball, okay. Baseball and football.
And beyond swimming, what other sports did you really get into as a child?
Yeah. So when I was younger, I played softball, and then I always stuck with swimming, and then got into volleyball middle school through high school, and finished out my senior year. All my sports ended, and I was like, I'm bored. I need something to do. And I started throwing in track and field, and ended up really liking that, but just did that my last year. So a volleyball player, swimmer mainly.
You did a lot.
Yeah.
And where did you go to high school down there?
It's called Russell County High School. We only have one high school.
Okay. My brother's in a small, well, he's actually a fairly decent sized county, but I think there's, he's in Southern Ohio actually. So there's some bigger schools around him, but he's in a smaller school. So I definitely understand that vibe. And it's kind of cool because everyone knows everyone. There's good and bad to that. I mean, some people don't like it. Some people love it, but it just depends on your vibe. I enjoy going to visit my brother in his town because, everyone waves to you. Everyone knows I'm his brother. So it's kind of cool, but I can see why people would, why it could, there's some downside to it as well.
I really liked growing up there though. I couldn't imagine growing up somewhere else. I really enjoyed it. So, I
mean, Molly, Kentucky is such a beautiful state to begin with. Like anytime I've gone down there, I've primarily been in the Louisville area, but like I'll drive in some of the foothills and it's beautiful. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah. I love it.
So when you were in high school, did you always want to go to University of Kentucky, or was that something that kind of came up out of nowhere?
So I grew up a Kentucky fan. I have a picture of, I was a baby in like a UK cheerleading outfit with my cousin. So my entire family essentially went to UK. My mom, my sister, my aunts, uncles, and then all my cousins, we ended up there at the same time, which was really fun. I kind of just knew that's where I wanted to go. I wanted the true Kentucky college experience. I thought maybe I'll go play college sports, but essentially just wanted to stick with the path of UK.
And what was UK like? What was the basketball experience like, going to see the team, and what was the whole college vibe like in Lexington?
It is a college town, what you expect a college town to be. big Saturday football games. We weren't a football school while I was there. Now we could maybe be considered a
Yeah,
football
oh
school.
yeah.
Be. The whole Saturday football thing, and then going back to thinking about just attending college basketball games at UK gives you chills, like that electric feeling of just being at a basketball school. So it's very sports centered. Um, Thinking back on that, it's just so fun, you
Molly, is
know?
this still Rupp Arena?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. I mean, it's the infamous. It's been around for years, and obviously he's a legend. And Kentucky's had so many incredible players. I mean, it seems like they're an NBA. Every year it seems like there's a stud coming out of Kentucky. Whether it's Anthony Davis, we go down the line of guys. I mean, there's a
No,
million of them, but it's
yeah.
just. I have a lot of guys. Actually, I have Antoine Walker, some guys from the '90s that follow one of my pages, and I've talked to Antoine before, and some of those guys, Derek Anderson, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of. And they won the championship, of course. So there's just so much history in Kentucky, and it really is one of the blue blood. Like it's definitely top 5 in my opinion in the country as far as basketball is concerned. Duke, and Carolina, et cetera. But it doesn't get much better than Kentucky.
No, I mean, thinking back on just watching basketball games, my friends and I would have one of my friends is very superstitious. So when we were there during the championship games, you sat in the exact same seat, and if you missed, you're the reason why we lost. So very into the basketball seasons.
And who were some of the players when you were there? Do you remember some of the guys? Was there anyone that was after Anthony Davis, or was it?
I was there from 2015 to 2016, 2018,
Okay.
2015, 2018. So you got like Willie Cauley-Stein,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
forgot about Cauley Stein. Yep.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, it's just a powerhouse. It really is. And that'll never end. It's just there's certain programs that to me that just continue, whether it's Ohio State in football, Kentucky in basketball, et cetera. They're always going to be a powerhouse. And it's just Kentucky. I mean, it is what it is. And so it's cool. It's nice to hear the stories. I like hearing the fan standpoint, from what you actually going to the arena and having that like vibe, because there's only so many places you can watch college basketball that has that much history. Carolina, Duke, Kentucky.
Yeah, you go and you stand in the student section, and they play that hype up song with all of the throwback videos, start to finish up to the present moment, and it will just give you chills watching that video, the environment that they have.
It's got to. It's got to. And down there, obviously, I know basketball is huge. Down there. What other sport is football? The second biggest sport you think at Kentucky? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Basketball and football for sure. But we're a pretty good baseball school as well. But fan base wise, definitely the football and basketball.
And when you were down there, so what did you major in first of all, and then how did you really get into the mental health aspect of things?
Yeah, so I went in a kinesiology major, so exercise science. So I was, basically in the sports complex the entire time I was there, right across from the baseball fields. And I had the experience to study abroad. So I lived in Australia for about 4 months, and I had a random roommate. And at the time, I was pre-physical therapy. And my random roommate, she went to Penn State, and she was a psychology major. And I would go to work every day in Australia with the physical therapist, and she would go to work every day with the sports psychologist. And he was scanning brains. He was on sidelines for pro rugby teams. And every day we would come home and we'd sit down and eat dinner, and I would ask her 1,000 questions. And I didn't even know it existed. Growing up in rural Kentucky, mental health isn't the hot topic. We're not educated on that. So I didn't even know at the time that sports psychology really existed. And so after that 4-month span of talking with her, getting to like meet her placement, and hearing about what she was doing, I immediately went back to Kentucky, signed up for the 2 sports psychology classes that they had, loved my professor, and loved all of the things that I was learning about, and decided that's the route I wanted to go. I'd already applied to PT school, gotten into a school, and I was like, nope, this is what I want to be doing every day. And so that's how I kind of really got into the mental health aspect of things.
I mean, Molly, that's such a good story for the younger kids coming up. When you're in college, I think people believe they have to have everything figured out at 18 years old, what they want to be, and you're not going to. Nope. So I think the fact that you had something figured out, and then you realize, you know what, I actually want to go in this direction. This is my true passion. That's a lesson for a lot of people, because there's some people who don't have the courage to do that, or they don't, maybe they put too much time into it and they think I'm not going to switch. And they look back 10 years later and realize like, man, I should have went the other way. So I think that's a really good lesson for the young kids coming up. Now, coming out of college, what kind of career what did you expect to get into? What did you want to, is there like a dream job out there for you that you thought this is what I'd want to do?
So I essentially went straight into my master's program because I just knew that in order to practice, I would have to at least have my master's. So I just went straight into my master's and finished that up about a year ago, year and a half ago, and I went straight into the doctorate after that. But in order to, you know, be able to finish that program up, I needed a lot of like clinical hours to be able to get certified to be a mental performance coach. So that's kind of how I fell upon Cleveland. I thought I need to be in a place where there are a lot of athletes. And in Kentucky, you really have the major colleges, but not really any professional organizations or anything like T3 that's training 6-year-olds all the way up to pro athletes. And it just so happened that, you know, my random roommate in Australia was from the Cleveland area. And then my freshman year lab partner, who became my best friend throughout college, was from Cleveland. And I'd visited a couple times and I was like, I want to get out of Kentucky. Let's just try it out. So I applied for an internship at T3 and ended up loving it. And I, you know, wanted to learn a little bit more about the sports psychology aspect of training. And I went to a conference for sports psychology. And while I was there, the Indian sports psychologist was giving a talk. And afterwards, he was just standing around. So I went up and introduced myself. I'd been living in Cleveland for like a week. And I just went up, introduced myself. And he was like, yeah, when we get back to Cleveland, this was in Portland, Oregon, by the way, just far away from
Totally
Cleveland.
random.
Yep. And he's like, when we get back, let's grab coffee. And we ended up, you know, really just like having a great connection. And he said that he would let me, you know, get all my mentoring and like clinical hours through him. And that's been such a great relationship to have, just in my own career, to be able to apply that to now what I'm doing at T3. So that's kind of how I fell into Cleveland.
I love it. What a story. I didn't realize you had known, the guy from the Indians, the sports
Yeah.
psychologist. That's a big connection to make.
Yeah, we've been, you know, I've been working under him, learning from him for the past year and a half, almost 2 years now.
Wow. And
Just
how
getting
long's
all
he been
those.
doing it?
He's been with them, I think, about 5 years now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
he's pretty young. He's like mid-30s. So yeah, he has a master's degree in sports psychology. But getting those hours through him has been like a wealth of knowledge to see what they're doing at that level, and then actually be able to just provide that to the athletes, the younger athletes at T3 has been awesome.
That really is awesome.
Yeah.
And when you look into this now, digging more into the mental health aspect, because I mean, when I talk to a lot of athletes, obviously you talk physical things. I mean, you talk about, speed, agility, all that, but really the mental aspect of the game. And we've heard this from Michael Jordan to Tiger Woods. I mean, all different people have talked about the mental aspect of any sport is critical.
Yeah.
And, especially and just playing an individual sport like golf, for example, you're not mentally there. You're not going to be, I don't care how talented you are, you're done. So you have to be mentally prepared. And as you know, I've dealt with my own anxiety and things I had with Uplifter. I run that blog. And, that's why I think I connected with you at T3. And I realized like right away, the mental part of sports, when I was younger, I never dealt too much with the mental part because I didn't think about it when I was a little kid. But as I got older, it did start affecting me a little bit. And I see people all the time who, they're terrified to go up in the batter's box in baseball, or terrified, if you're starting in a position in basketball, whatever it might be, they don't know how to handle the anxiety. They don't know how to handle the pressure. So right off the bat, Molly, what is the greatest challenge you see athletes facing from a mental health standpoint?
From a mental health standpoint, I really feel like, I mean, when we think about the statistics, 48% of collegiate athletes reported feeling symptoms of anxiety and depression. And so from a clinical mental health standpoint, that is 100% one of the biggest challenges that they're facing. From a performance standpoint, I would really say handling the expectations that they put on themselves, and then not knowing the consequences of their thoughts. and the chain reaction that their thoughts really have on their performance. They have a thought, and that thought creates an emotion, and that emotion then creates a physical response in their body. And no one has really taught them how to manage and regulate the physical responses their body has to stress and pressure. And so, these athletes are getting physical reps in every single day with their physical skills. They're practicing every single day. And when they step out on their field of play, no one can strip that away from them. That doesn't just disappear, but in a split second, their ability to focus, have composure, cope with the stressors and pressure can all just disappear. And I think it's on coaches, it's on parents, it's on, the athletic community to understand that we haven't taught them those things. All of those things are skills, just like the physical, but we have not taught them how to do that. And so that is the biggest struggle, is learning how to manage and regulate those things and finding the resources to do that as well.
And Molly, do you have any idea why anxiety or depression might be the number one challenge? Like, is it just that everyone? I mean, because I feel like in America, especially, stress and anxiety is just huge. It's everywhere. I feel like, there's so many. I think there's 40 million people that have general anxiety disorder. So it's rampant. But like when it comes to athletics specifically, the anxiety depression aspect, where does that come from?
I think that's really from an individualized standpoint. It could be different for everyone. I think just being able, I think that we are conditioning young athletes to perform at such a high rate, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But, when I think back on the athletes that I work with at T3, I'm working with 14, 15-year-old athletes, baseball players, who are being looked at by collegiate scouts, MLB scouts. They're going to showcases where they are expected to perform. And so when that is put on you at such a young age and you're not taught how to manage those things, that's what creates that anxiety and depression at that older stage in life.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, for the pressure, for example, like for a 15-year-old, that's a lot for a 30-year-old to handle pressure. But for a 15-year-old, you're just not emotionally, just your emotional regulation is not there yet. I mean, your brain's not even fully developed. So it's like, how do you expect someone so young to really grasp all that? And that's why I think someone like you comes into play, and you're so critical, because you can at least teach them certain skills and coping mechanisms to get them through some of that. But when you look at mental health, as far as athletics are concerned, do you think it's more important to, I guess, stop some of the stuff before it happens, or do you think it's more important to learn how to manage it, or both?
I think both, but I'll get these like calls from parents and coaches, and they're like, we've got a huge state meet, coming up. Come talk to him the day before. And I'm like, okay. Or I'll get a phone call from a parent or a coach, and they're like, oh, Johnny's just, had a terrible 3 games this weekend, and he's had a mental breakdown. And they'll call him, like just like a head case. Why are you waiting for your athlete to get to that stage and get to that point? This is all preventative. You would not strength train all off season and in season and then expect the season opener to happen and that athlete to be able to perform like they would, or you haven't had a practice at all before your first game. For the past 3 months, you haven't practiced at all, and you expect them to go out there and perform at such a high level,
It's not
right?
going to happen. Yep.
It's the same thing. I mean, when your leg is broken, you go to the doctor. When you're failing a class, you go see a tutor, right? But we're still in our daily life studying before we have to go see a tutor. We're trying to take care of our health so that we don't have to go to a doctor. We should be doing the same with our mental health as well. If I can work with an athlete before they have a mental breakdown, as a coach or parent would call it, yeah, that's great, because hopefully we wouldn't get to a mental breakdown, right? Like, that's the goal, is to prevent those things. But if they do happen, then we'll kind of get to the source of why is that happening, and then what are some strategies and tools that we can put in place to help with that.
Miley, I'm really glad you brought that point up, because my cousin's a psychologist, and he's been doing it for about 10 years now, and he's in his mid-30s, great kid. And he's really given me a lot of my wisdom over the years, just in mindfulness. I mean, he's the one that first got me into all this meditation, years ago, like a decade ago, when I was kind of naive in my early 20s, didn't really know what I was doing. And he was like, you should practice mindfulness and this and that. So I think, the athletes listening, I mean, I think the number one thing for me with my anxiety has been practicing mindfulness and really thinking about what I'm thinking about, metacognition, and kind of thinking like, okay, how is my thinking patterns every day? Are they typically, because I know a lot of people have negative thinking patterns, and a lot of us do. So when you're an athlete and you have a negative thinking pattern, how do you go into a game and succeed when you're having those, like you said? I mean, you're not taking any mental reps. You might be taking physical reps, but if you're not taking the mental reps, it's not going to really work out as well as you think it could. So when I look at someone like LeBron James or these Tom Brady, these high performing athletes, I don't think they're going into these games with negative thought patterns. You know, they've taken care of that. I mean, they might not, you know, so and I'm sure they work very hard at that in different aspects of their life.
Yeah.
So again, you know, I'm glad you brought that point up because it's very important with mental health in general, especially with sports. At least what I've seen is preparing beforehand and really kind of doing those reps, like you said, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, whatever it might be, that anything that could potentially negatively affect you on the field or the court. So
Yeah.
when what are some things that you know tell athletes as far as like what are some coping techniques or you know things to manage anxiety, for example?
Yeah, I want to start also. I like how you made the point about our negative thought patterns, because we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts on a daily basis. There is no way that all of those are going to be positive,
Mm-mm.
and especially as athletes. And I mean, we have these negative thoughts because our brain's first job is to protect us. Now, in like caveman times, that was to protect them from physical harm, obviously, but now it's more so to protect our egos. And so there's one thing I know to be true: negative thinking works pretty much 100% of the time, right? And I give the athletes this analogy, and if any of the athletes I work with are listening to this, they're probably going to roll their eyes because they heard it so many times, but it's just a perfect analogy. If I put you in the room that you're in right now, you shut the door, you've got to stay in there for 3 hours, and there's a little red button sitting on the floor. I say, don't push it. That's your only task. Don't push the little red button. What are you going to want to do?
Push it.
Exactly.
Yep.
So it's the same thing with our performance. If I'm thinking, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, what am I probably going to do? Mess up.
Yep.
Right. And so we know that the negative thoughts are going to come. It's really hard, though, to go from negative to positive. So I think there's this misconception that my job is to help athletes be positive. Sure, that's the end goal. I mean, we all want to be positive, but sometimes it is unrealistic. And so if I can just help an athlete get from negative to neutral in that intense and high pressure situation, we've always got the upper hand. They're going to have the advantage, because the athlete that can regulate the thought is going to win the day.
I love
Because
that.
you know, the negative thought, like I said before, the negative thought creates that physical response in our body. Sometimes it's hard for athletes to remember, like in the heat of the moment, what thoughts they're having, but it's super easy to remember when your heart's beating out of your chest, your stomach hurts, you're tense and tight, the visuals are speeding up, you're shaking, you know, all of those things we remember as athletes. But it's important that we then have those tools and skills. So some of those coping mechanisms, you know, especially with any of the athletes I work with, when things start to speed up, or when our breathing starts to get a little bit faster, we're tense and tight, something that they can always utilize and they don't need anything on them to do is just breath work. And it's quick, it's portable, and no one knows that you're doing it. And so I do a lot of breath work with the athletes that I work with, whether that be, you know, right before they're about to step into the box, or right before they're about to step out on the court, or after they've made an error and everything does start to speed up and they're thinking, don't do that again, don't do that again, don't do that again, right? Like, we get reset routines put into place for every athlete that I work with. We have a reset routine. There's a pretty base system for that, but it's very individualized to what's going to work for me won't work for you, right? So getting that reset where they're able to just neutralize their thoughts. So just asking themselves, you know, give me the facts. What did I just do wrong? Is it true? Is it untrue? The thought that I'm having, and who told me it? If it was me, it's probably false. And so then we recognize what just happened, and then we release the physical response in our body. So a lot of the athletes I also work with get pretty tense and tight. So doing some quick muscle relaxation, you know, tensing up that major muscle group and then relaxing it. And then, you know, re-engage back into the present moment. We've got trigger words, cues, physical cues that we can do that can help us reset our focus and kind of, have some short-term memory loss when it comes to errors on the field or court.
Molly, you made some great points there. So many things I want to touch on. You talked about going from negative to neutral instead of just negative to positive. And I think it's so important. I've written about this in my blog before, where people always say, in this society, especially, I think when people think of mental health, they say, well, just be positive. They don't understand. I know. Trust me. I've heard that so many times when I used to tell people I was struggling with depression, whatever it was. Oh, just be positive, as if it's just a switch. Yeah, you just flip it on. I'm like, first of all, I want to tell them, like, you don't know anything about neuroscience if you think that's how it works. But second of all, I write about, realistic thoughts. Try to have a little more realistic thoughts. Like, by realistic, I mean, like, if you're very negative on yourself, obviously, your self-perception is probably not anywhere near what the reality really is. So try to be a little more realistic about it. You don't have to be positive. Everything doesn't have to be perfect, but try to be realistic. So but you say negative to neutral, I like that even better. That's a better way to put it. So I think it's so key for people listening is that you don't have to be positive all the time. You're not going to be, and especially with like happiness. To me, happiness is a fleeting emotion. You're not going to be happy 24/7, but if you learn how to manage the times you're not happy, it makes it a lot, everything flows a lot better then. So I think for me in my life, even outside of sports, learning how to manage the downtimes has been a savior. It doesn't mean I'm going to be happy 24/7. I'm certainly not. But, the times I'm down, Molly, I'm not as down as I used to be because I've learned how to manage those, so.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what you're teaching these athletes. It's so critical. And especially at a young age, if they can learn that, they can apply it to other areas of their life. I love it.
I mean, I tell them this applies to school. This applies to negative situations that are going on in your life. And it's so important to understand their whole identity, not just the athletic identity, because, the athletes that are coming into T3 are elite athletes. They want to be elite athletes, but at some point, sport is not going to be your sole identity. And so it's prepping them for that as well, so that whenever they are in the real world one day, they can manage their emotions and thoughts as well.
That's excellent. And do you see, Molly, like the younger generation coming up, do you see more of a focus? Because I'm 37. So the people, and no disrespect to people listening, but a lot of the older people I deal with in my life, people in their 60s and stuff, they don't necessarily get into mental health as much. They do, but not as much. The younger generation seems to me more attuned to it, or at least more, they're more open to it, I should say. Do you see that as well? Or do you see something different out there?
Surprisingly, my main clientele is 15 to 18-year-old boys, and they're open to it. I mean, if it says anything, I was in a 15 and 16U and a 17 and 18U baseball dugout this weekend doing mental performance work. And so they all respect that. And it, not to say that it didn't take a lot of time to earn that respect, to be able to even be in that dugout. Trust me, it was a slow start when I first showed up at T3, especially with the older coaches. Some of those baseball coaches, I really had to earn my stripes there and really show what I was doing. But it only took, one leader on the baseball team to start seeing me and start seeing some success, and then the rest followed. There's always going to be a little bit of hesitation when it comes to mental health, because especially as athletes, they don't want to look weak. Mm-hmm. But now we see huge names in sport coming out and taking a stance on the stigma. And so I think there's been so much improvement, and your statement is so true. The younger generation is really prioritizing mental health over performance and other aspects of life. I really see that.
As it should be. I mean, I think in my generation, I'm an older millennial. So like, we were the first to really, in my opinion, one of the first to really, like in my generation, it's a little more open with mental health than it was in the previous generations. We were the first to kind of say, okay, something's not right here. We got to we got to figure this out, because it's not, like you said, it's not just, you can't, when you look at like the ego or superficial things, of course, when you're younger, you want to look tough in front of your friends, but as you get older, you gotta work through that. You can't just use, I mean, you gotta when it comes to mental health in general, if you don't know how to manage your own emotions, like you were saying, and get through some of the things that happen to you, you're going to have a rough life. So it's just, and I've experienced it firsthand. I know what it's like to go through bouts of depression for months. And it's terrible. It's the worst thing. I mean, my depression I went through about 4 years ago, Molly, was the worst I've ever been through. I haven't gone through anything since. I've really did a lot of work on myself. But I can't imagine if you're an athlete and you're out there, I mean, and you have pressure to perform and you're going through something like that, there's no way I can make it through that. I mean, I don't know how any athlete would do that. And I know Kevin Love's come out for the Cavs and he's been a real big spokesman.
Yeah.
And I actually had an NBA player on here named Josh Powell. He played for the Lakers with Kobe and won championships with Kobe. And he's a very big mental health guy. And he actually talked about it for a while. And he actually held him and Lamar. He's good friends with Lamar Odom. And they held, I think it was about 6 months ago, they had some kind of mental health awareness. I don't know what they call it, a gala basically down in Atlanta. And it was awesome. So I want to give a shout out to Josh because I love the athletes who are pushing this.
Yeah. I think back to Royce White and how I think it was 2012, he spoke out and fought for, mental health to be a part of his contract in the NBA. I mean, he struggled with OCD and just generalized anxiety disorder. He couldn't get on planes, and he eventually ended up leaving the NBA, but he still moved that needle. I don't think that a lot of athletes would have spoken out without him, putting up the fight that he did, because in 2012 the NBA was a completely different beast when it comes to mental health. That was not to be talked about. I think even his agents recommended he not talk about it or bring it up.
Wow.
And now you see such a different outlook on things. I mean, Kevin Love is a prime example.
He really is. And there's so many, I feel like there's a lot of athletes now, Molly, like you mentioned, the last couple of years really coming out and speaking, pretty bluntly about it, which I love. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. And I think it's the generations coming up that are learning. I mean, we're learning more about the brain. We're learning more about psychology and neuroscience and how things, epigenetics and how things go together. So we're kind of learning, what's possible, how we can, manage our emotions better and manage our mental health better. I mean, it's not, I think a lot of people thought mental health is something, either you're weak or you're strong. And it's just not, that's just not how it is. I mean, I know my dad's generation, when he, even some of my uncles and stuff, they'll say stuff. I'm just like, that's not really what's going on. I mean, you're not, it doesn't matter how strong minded you are. If you're, if there's a chemical imbalance, it's going to be really tough for you to get through something. So, and when you, Molly, when you deal with I guess when you have an athlete like depression, for example, I mean, obviously I'm sure you recommend going, to see a therapist or a psychologist or whatever, but how do you, how does a mental health, or mental performance coach coincide or work with, a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
Yeah, I think it's huge to see a holistic approach. At T3 we have a physical therapy department, and so I'm starting to work with them as well with return to play injury, and that coincides with our nutritionist that we have on staff now. And so it all ties in together, whereas I can treat those things that are related to performance. When it gets into the clinical side, I never want to slow down the athlete's process. What may be going on in their regular life that's not related to sport and performance, I'm 100% going to refer that athlete out, because that's what the athlete needs. And that's what's going to help the athlete, manage these things at a quicker rate. But it's so important to stay in the loop with everyone who's involved with that athlete. It really takes a whole team.
A holistic approach. I love that. I mean, in any part of life, especially when it comes to mental health, like diet, exercise, obviously the mental routines, it all ties together. If your diet's not on par with what you're doing mentally, it's going to be tough. So, I mean, I think that's one thing I had to learn, is really looking at a holistic perspective of my whole life, of like people I was hanging out with, what I was doing, foods I was eating when I was going to bed. It all ties together.
And I think that's what T3 is doing a good job at, is really taking that holistic approach.
I love that. I mean, they got to be one. I mean, you guys are really on the cutting edge, Molly, of a lot of things at T3. I mean, especially you yourself. I mean, this is, you got to look 20, 30 years from now, you guys are going to be looked at as a model for other gyms opening up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's got to be pretty cool. And when you, Molly, taking it back now, when you first started, what was your biggest challenge? Like you said, I know it was kind of tough to get in with certain coaches, but what beyond that, what other challenges did you face when you got the, job as a mental performance coach?
So I started out as an intern, and I was actually out on the floor observing them train, which was not my wheelhouse and still is not my wheelhouse. I do have a degree in kinesiology, but that is not what I wanted to use it for. So I was able to see that aspect that they do so well. But I started out, just taking small groups for 5 minutes at the end of their workout. And I would start just sprinkling in a little bit of mental performance. And they had never had anything like that before. And I kind of Ryan Richmond was a great resource, and Eric as well, to kind of help me introduce this. And I, showed it to Mike a little bit, and we decided to just go ahead and make it a new service. And I really didn't get a chance to start doing one-on-one stuff with athletes until after quarantine. So I started to get started, and then quarantine happened. And I think I was able to take the sports psychology approach with our coaches during quarantine. We were meeting on a daily basis for 3 to 4 months during quarantine over Zoom. And I was able to really share with our coaches the psychological aspect of what we're doing in that facility, and the importance of psychological safety, that when every person walks in, this is the framework. This is how we create a psychologically safe environment for these athletes that are going to make them feel heard, make them feel like they have a voice in our facility, and also want to come back to our facility and tell their friends to come back to our facility, but also thinking about, how do we give proper feedback to these athletes? How do we take a different approach than the traditional sport coach does? I don't want to generalize sport coaches, but a lot of them, older generation sport coaches, are still living in that mental toughness, just do the hard conditioning, and that's all that it takes to be mentally tough realm. And I don't think we're taking that approach. While there is still a little bit of that, you need a little bit of that. I was able to introduce the psychological aspect of, how do we give process feedback that's not so outcome oriented, so that when they do leave the facility and they go off to college, they know what's right and what's wrong with their technique, because they've actually learned something in our building.
Yeah.
So it started there. It started during quarantine. And then we got back into the facility. We started to get to apply this type of stuff. I was able to observe a lot of sessions, give feedback to our coaches on how they could be, just improving some cues and conversations with our athletes. And then, I would say the past 7 months, I've really been honing in on the one-on-one aspect, and starting to have some individual clients, and then also doing a lot of team workshops. And I think, the major struggle is just getting the word out that this is what this is, because a lot of people are still confused on, what does she do? I was walking on the treadmill, I think 2 days ago, and someone walked in and was like, what do you do again? The mental stuff? They're just not sure about it. But the word is starting to get out. I think that was the biggest struggle, is just getting it out there. This is what it is, and this is how you get set up, and the whole process of it.
Molly, what's been the most rewarding aspect of being a mental performance coach?
Getting text messages after successful games of, I've been working with you for a month now, and we've been practicing our breath work, our muscle relaxation, our reset routines, and our pre-performance routines, and you actually start to apply them. And then I get that text. It's like, hey, I listened to the muscle relaxation and my batting average went up X amount. Or, hey, I just ran this race and PR'd by 20 seconds, and it's all because I, did my pre-performance routine, and I feel so much more in control of my thoughts. Those are the messages that are the rewarding part. That's what makes you keep showing up, for sure.
Was there a moment, Molly, when you first started, when you realized right away, like, I guess, was there a success story that you kind of think, okay, this is good, this is working, like what I'm doing is actually working?
Yeah. So I started working with a baseball player. He's very young, but very good for his age. And he was playing up. From a confidence standpoint, he was really struggling. He was better than kids that were 3 to 4 years older than him. And he kind of felt some guilt on that. So that held him back. He didn't ever want to overstep that. And now seeing the progress, he was my, kind of first discharge, not really discharge, but, my goal is to lose the client, because that means what I'm doing is working. But I still check in with these athletes, even after we finish the training, I mean, we'll see each other once a month or every couple of months, or they'll, keep me in the loop every time I see them at the facility. But, this athlete had a lights out season, and I was able to go see him play at a couple of games and be able to actually see him reset himself out on the field and know what his reset routine was and watch him apply it, and then be able to be present in the moment. It's kind of just an aha moment. Like, this is really working. Not that I didn't believe in it, I obviously believed in it, but getting to finally see these athletes compete because of COVID, this is my first real season being able to see these athletes have a competition and be able to apply this stuff. And so seeing that was awesome. I left
That's
that
so
day
cool.
thinking, I can't wait to see more kids do this.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, it's got to be such a rewarding feeling to actually see the work you put in, and especially when it comes to the mental aspect of it. I mean, it's such a,
It's
you're right. It's
invisible.
not, it is invisible. It's not like the physical. Physical is different. You can, or, you can see that within days, you can start seeing that. But the mental aspect of it, you never know what's going to catch on, what's not going to. Are they doing the reps behind the scenes, and are they doing the work? So that's got to be so rewarding when you see,
Yeah.
someone actually doing it and then actually working, and, and I believe so wholeheartedly in everything you do. And when you're talking about someone coming up now in the ranks and they want to go to college for, and get into mental health when it comes to sports, what would you tell them? What is some advice to give someone coming up?
I think that school has really taught me a lot, but at the end of the day, being able to get actual repetition at these things has been what's taught me the most and is what has helped me learn the most within the field. But the biggest thing is really finding someone who is already in this field and learning from them and the mistakes that they've made, the trials that they have faced in this field, and getting a better understanding of, hey, these are the obstacles that you're going to face. This is the pushback that you may get. This is the excitement that you're going to get out of this. This is what the schedule is like. This is what you should expect. That has been a game changer to me, because I can't imagine without my mentor being where I'm at now, because he's just created so much insight into how things operate and how I should move in certain situations. So I think finding someone who's already in the field is the biggest key if you're really interested in this.
And what about, is there any books you've read, Molly, that you love when it comes to mental performance, or anything, or any authors or any podcasts or anything you've gotten into where you're like, that's a really good one?
Yeah. So I have a whole list of books. It's really bad.
Oh,
I have
I do too.
I have a whole list of books. But podcast wise, I really like Michael Gervais.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He's a great sports psychologist, and he has on a lot of good people on his podcast. So that is one that I would listen to. I also really like Sua. He has a podcast as well. I'm trying to think book wise. I really have a whole list that I would have to look into.
There's
But
so many good ones.
Relentless is really good.
Who's that by? Do you know?
I would have to get a
Relentless. Okay, I'm gonna get that myself.
um let me try to look up. I have a whole list.
Yeah, I want to hear some of these because I'm a huge reader. I know a lot of, there's so many good books out there to just, and you could pick up so many tidbits reading these books, when it comes to just various things when it comes, mental health. I read a lot about neuroscience and psychology, and I just love it. I could read for all day about that stuff.
I'm pulling the list up. Let's see.
Yeah, I want to hear some of these names.
So I really like Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Okay, mindset. Okay.
Good one. Give and Take by Adam Grant is pretty good. And I think, did you mention The Atomic Habit? That one's
Yes,
really good.
James Clear. I didn't mention it in this podcast. I have that book. I love it. Yeah,
Yes.
James Clear is great.
The Obstacle is the Way is a really, really good one by Ryan Holiday.
Oh yeah, I love Ryan Holiday.
Grit by Angela Duckworth.
Haven't heard of that one. Okay.
Really good. And then if you're looking for more like psychological, like you're thinking, The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Oh, I don't know how to pronounce this last name.
The brain that changed itself.
Yes, the brain
Okay.
that changes itself.
I'm going to get that one. That's right up my alley.
Yeah, I really like all of those. And then from like an athlete standpoint, I think that Heads Up Baseball 2.0 is pretty good. It's more of like a workbook to kind of help, pitch by pitch, things like that. But also like Mind Gym is good. There's like 10 books I could give somebody. But usually with the athletes I work with, I'm like, what are you looking for? What do you need specifically? And then I'll send them that way.
And Molly, for those athletes in the Cleveland area who might want to go to T3 and are interested in the mental health aspect of it, what should they expect from you, and what should they expect from T3 in general when it comes to the mental performance?
Yeah, so to start out from a one-on-one standpoint, I really like to meet with the athlete solely, chat with them for 30 minutes just to get to know them a little bit better, what they need and what kind of tools are going to be working for them as an individual athlete. And then from there, I create their own program. We'll meet once a week, every other week, and it dwindles down from there. But I think it's just important to know that if you do mental performance work, it's a way to create a competitive advantage over other athletes, but it's also a way just to create, a plan to overcome any obstacles that you're going to be facing. And also just to have a neutral source that will listen to you is really important as an athlete. And so I think that's what you can expect the most to get out of it.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, T3, I can speak, just from going there for 6 months. It's a great place. The vibe is awesome. It's a really positive vibe, and you walk in there, people are smiling, and the gym's beautiful, and there's so much going on. So it really is an awesome place. And okay, my last question for you, I can go on about mental health for 2
I know.
hours, but my last question. So fast forward 40 years from now, you're retired, you're on a beach somewhere, you're looking back at your career. What do you want people to know about the legacy of Molly McQueary?
I really think that your legacy is not necessarily the name, but it's about like the deeds that you do while you have time here. And so I would, from a career standpoint, like to, be seen as someone who made improvements in the sports industry when it comes to mental health, but also just in general, just be someone who was a listener and was there to help in all realms, not just sport, but in life in general. That may be too broad, but
No, it's not. That's great. I love the fact, I mean, the deeds you do. That's exactly what it should be about. I mean, you're not going to be remembered. You're going to be remembered about how you treated people, and how you made them feel, and how you helped them. So I think that's awesome. And you're at the cutting edge, Molly. I mean, you really are. You're one of the first generations to really push mental health in sports. So you're going to be look back in 40 years from now, you're going to be one of those people on top of your game, that everyone else is looking at for advice coming up, because you're one of the first to ever do it. So, I mean, the mental health is really starting to come on strong now in the last, 5-10 years, but it was, like you said, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was not a thing, but in sports, not even just in life, but especially with sports. So
right.
you really are at the cutting edge. So is T3. And again, I really appreciate you coming on. I'd love to have you again, come on again, and we could talk other subjects, but
Yeah,
we could both talk mental health for hours. So this is, it's been awesome. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you so much for having me on. I've enjoyed it. Love the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Molly. So we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thanks for coming on.